Good afternoon, everybody. Casey Stiegel here alongside Heather Hayes in the Fox 4 News studios in downtown Dallas, where we continue our special streaming coverage now on Fox Local of the shooting that occurred this morning at an ICE facility in Dallas. And we want to get you to some new images that are coming in, new details as well, shared through the Department of Homeland Security. The ICE deputy director telling Fox that the sniper was on a nearby rooftop and opened fire indiscriminately on the entire ICE facility, both inside and around the building. The deputy director says that they have found bullets throughout the entire facility. Again, the facility off of Stemmons Freeway, in fact, a very busy location. Heather, you mentioned this was right as rush hour was beginning and traffic came to a grinding halt.
It did. So now to bring into this conversation, we want to talk with a counterterrorism and counterintelligence expert who can give us some insight on what investigators are looking at right now. Eric O'Neill joining us now live via Zoom. You've got a strong background. Again, former FBI, counterterrorism, counterintelligence operative. You wake up this morning, you hear this news of what happened in Dallas, Texas. What is your initial thought?
My initial thought was that this sounds a lot like something we've heard before. This is what, the fourth or fifth 20-something-year-old who has taken up a gun and decided to shoot into a crowded area, or in the case of Charlie Kirk, an assassination. If you look at what just happened with Charlie Kirk, once again, that's very similar in the way that it was shooting from a rooftop, writing things on the bullets. And then, of course, just recently in August, Minneapolis shooter into a church wrote ideological messages on his bullets. So I'm wondering, is this becoming a trend, and is this something that we really have to worry about?
When you talk about it becoming a trend, I mean, talk about the fear of that. I mean, this is a time in the country, clearly, Eric, where so many people are divided, and we've seen that really come to the forefront with Charlie Kirk's assassination. A lot of viewpoints, a lot of people, some even celebrating Charlie Kirk's death. Does this make law enforcement in this country sitting ducks, in your opinion?
In uniform, I would be very concerned. You know, in times of these high-profile ideological divisions, where there are, like you said, Casey, people celebrating some of the worst things that happen, people who have these psychotic breaks might decide that in their mind, in their psychotic mess, they can be a hero by taking up a rifle and doing something absolutely abysmally terrible. And so that has to be of great concern to law enforcement, but particularly ICE, because this is the second attack in 2 months on a ICE facility.
I mean, at the end of the day, everybody, like you said, you put on your uniform. People just want to go home to their families at night. They want to get home safely. They started out going to work this morning. People end up dying. Let's talk about then the profile of the person who was laying prone on this roof, firing shots. What is in that mind? What is the profile you're putting together?
Well, we don't know a lot right now. All we know is that it was an individual who laid on a roof and fired into a sally port, and as you said earlier, fired all around the building. It looks like this was an amateur shooter, not an expert marksman in any sense of the term. And he had written on the shell casings, it looked like in Sharpie, because the director of the FBI, Kash Patel, actually published the images on his X account. He wrote anti-ICE, which suggests a anti-ICE ideology, or that he was led into this somehow by those on the radical side of politics who are anti-ICE. So they're going to be looking at some sort of ideology, motivation behind this shooting, which means they'll be digging into his life, into his background, his writings online, into his possessions at his home, to try to determine the why for this attack.
Eric, can you talk about the law enforcement procedure here? We've gotten into this a little bit, but the victimology, you've already kind of hinted to that. Also, just putting together a timeline. These are very basics when it comes to law enforcement, but this is how you start an investigation.
Exactly. They're going to, this is a little different from the Charlie Kirk shooting, because the shooter took his own life, which gives them high confidence that they've actually caught the shooter. But what law enforcement will be doing next, in addition to looking into his background and the motivations, is looking for whether there were co-conspirators, there were people who gave him aid or support, whether he had assistance in doing this. and if there is someone else that needs to be arrested.
Well, so you mentioned that perhaps an amateur because of shooting all around. Does that mean that this was perhaps sort of a snap judgment and just maybe out of emotion or anger, or something perhaps more planned out?
It would take some planning to get up on a rooftop and shoot, but not a lot. I suspect, and of course I don't know, this is very early, that this was someone who had some sort of psychotic break, decided that he was going to go out with a bang. He took his own life. Sometimes shooters will take their own life. Sometimes they commit what's called suicide by law enforcement, where they fire into police or law enforcement expecting that they'll return fire. Here, of course, the shooter took his own life. And why do I call him an amateur? Well, he shot all around, and if it's ideologically motivated, it would suggest that he was shooting at ICE law enforcement officers, but he didn't hit any. He actually hit 3 detainees, killing 2 and injuring a 3rd. So that seems to be not someone who was taking great aim in how he was firing.
Still shows a little bit of premeditation. Would you not agree, Eric? I mean, again, this building is fairly nondescript, right? Like if you're driving by, it doesn't have the traditional signage out front like a lot of businesses. And this person had to have some intelligence in terms of the comings and goings of that building. We know that a vehicle had pulled up into the Sally Port and it had some detainees inside. So there has to be a little bit of premeditation there, or some studying in terms of the schedules and when people were coming and going, and the best way to see the vehicles and the exposures.
Precisely. He would have had to have planned where he was going to shoot from what rooftop, which is why, I said there had to be some planning involved. And you're right. Those ICE facilities are guarded. They don't have law enforcement officers who typically stand outside where they could be under threat. And so what he did was he waited until the Sally Port opened, and think of it kind of like an old castle where you have, the drawbridge and then an entryway, like a tunnel that you go through, and the portcullis that comes up, and that means that you have 2 ways of entry. So a van comes through from the inside out. They open one gate, goes into the Sally Port, then that back gate closes, the front gate opens, and that is when the shooter took aim at what looks like a van that was pulling out. And once again would hit detainees that were either inside or near that van.
So, Eric, how does one find out this information? Because there are tens of thousands of people who drive by this building, this area every day, probably had no idea what they were looking at.
Well, you do some reconnaissance. If you were to do quite a bit of planning, and let's not help the next shooter figure out how to do this, you would watch the building. Now, that doesn't mean that he didn't just get up on the roof, when it was dark and wait until the first van left. That was his first opportunity to take a shot. Unfortunately, unless he left some writings behind, we're never going to know.
Eric O'Neill, former FBI counterterrorism and counterintelligence expert, is with us now live. Eric, again, we thank you very much for your expertise and your voice here. I wanted to ask you about the profile of the particular shooter. It seems as if he is in his late 20s, a white male. It seems as if this is fitting a certain type of profile, and you alluded to this a little bit earlier in terms of some of the other suspects in this country as of late that have carried out attacks or attacks of violence like this.
Yeah, yes, I noted that the last few shooters have been in their 20s, and you have to wonder what is making people determine that they're going to go out shooting, with the exception of perhaps the Charlie Kirk shooter who in his naivete seemed to think he was going to get away with it. But to take up arms and do something so extreme, most of us wouldn't ever consider doing this. And so that is something that right now we as a society have to look into, the ideology behind that and how we can stamp that out to prevent some of these in the future.
Well, and also looking forward too, what does this mean differently for ICE and for Department of Homeland Security? What does their daily job look like now?
That's certainly true. And they have been on high alert for the past 2 months because recall just a couple months ago, there was a shooting right around the corner in Prairieland, Texas, at a different ICE facility. So certainly this one in Dallas was on high alert, and why you would see very little movement around it. You have these gated systems to gain exit and entry. We're going to be looking at a lot more security at these ICE facilities around the country. It's probably starting now.
Eric O'Neill, again, we thank you so much for your time this afternoon, and again, your power expertise in kind of helping us parse through all of this and figure out where we go next. Eric O'Neill, thank you for joining us this afternoon here on Fox 4.
And Casey and Heather, thank you for having me.
Thank you.